Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation podcast.
Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation, where our experts bring you fresh ideas and new perspectives on how consumers eat, drink, shop, groom, and think. I'm Edward Bergen, global food and drink analyst, all-round foodie, and I am a hummus fanatic. So today, we're going to be talking about probably the world's biggest food trend, I guess, at the moment. At least the media seems to be talking about it all the time. We're going to be talking about veganism and plant-based and this whole trend. As I said, I'm a food and drink analyst, and I'm going to hopefully bring some of that food, some of those food examples, why this is becoming so big. But why this podcast is so special is that with me, we've got Sarah and Sam, and they're going to bring different perspectives on this vegan trend. So Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Jindal. I am a global beauty analyst with Mintel. I'm based in New York. And so I'm really excited about this topic because it's definitely something that we've been talking about within the beauty space for the last few years and have just watched it explode for a variety of different reasons. So I'm really looking forward to digging into this a little bit deeper.
Okay, awesome. And Sam?
So my name is Sam Dover. I'm a senior retail analyst here at Mintel in the UK, and I cover a whole range of different sectors. But today I'm here to kind of bring my opinion on veganism in the fashion industry. Okay,
so I think my big headline, and when we were discussing this before we got onto this call, actually, I don't think this trend is about the vegans at all. I think this is fantastic for the vegans who are just seeing their food and drink industry just change and develop so quickly compared to maybe what it was like 10 years ago, where you were given a few meat substitutes and you weren't really sure what were in those meat substitutes, to now where it's just a wonderful celebration of vegetables and plant proteins. And you can see how excited I get, guys.
I mean, it's the same in beauty, because if you go back a handful of years, there were maybe a dozen brands that were kind of certified vegan or claimed to be vegan. That really was all that, people that were living that vegan lifestyle had the opportunity to choose from. So it was super limited. And then you think about, I'm going to put my kind of sciencey nerd hat on, but from an ingredient perspective, because that's my background, is really, we've seen this massive evolution of the ingredients that are available to actually formulate the products. And that has totally changed the game. So now not only do you have this great, selection of vegan brands to choose from, they're actually making really good products. So it's not just some, something someone's mixing up in their their bathroom or their basement or something like it used to be. You've now got big, massive multinational manufacturers, mainstream brands moving towards this whole idea of creating something that is suitable for that vegan consumer.
Yeah, we've just had like Muck Vegan in McDonald's. We know that there's the I think the Whopper burger. These are big fast food joints, and it's not necessarily the health and wellness space. It's just these big corporations that are picking up on this trend. Fashion, something I guess other than fur and maybe some leather. That's my lack of knowledge of the fashion industry, based on wearing t-shirt and jeans, guys. So that's my fashion knowledge.
Yeah, I think, there's definitely that perception, but I think slowly but surely that is changing. So what we're seeing is, like you guys are saying, just more and more companies are kind of thinking about what the rise in veganism means for their brand. But on top of that, the new interest that we're seeing in vegan fashion kind of goes hand in hand generally with sustainability. So there's this perception that buying into vegan fashion is more sustainable, because obviously, like you say, leather, fur, all of those kind of fabrics are hot topics, but now you're seeing it move into everything from people questioning the kind of ethics behind silk, behind wool, behind feathers, and even some products are made with animal glue as well. So actually it's a really complex issue. And we're seeing that kind of begin to evolve. You've got lots and lots of brands moving away from all of these animal-based fabrics. But then, as I say, it's in theory, it also goes hand in hand with rising interest in sustainability. And actually, it's quite complex because vegan fabrics are not always more sustainable. And I think that's what's particularly interesting.
You just gave me an idea, and this is a question actually for both of you. compared to in food and drink, when we think about ingredients, and we've just actually had Natasha's Law, for example, launched in the UK, which was unfortunately someone who ate a pret-a-manger sandwich, had a very bad reaction and lost her life because no clarity around ingredients. Food and drink is getting clearer and clearer about those ingredients. In your industries, is it the same? Is the same legislation? I can imagine in beauty, maybe even more so than fashion.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a couple of different things that are happening. I mean, one is a few years ago, we started to see this kind of proliferation of bad press against certain ingredients or certain classes of ingredients. So you're probably used to seeing in advertising now and in the media, sulfate-free and paraben-free and all of these different things. I mean, I blame a lot of that on social media and blogs, to be frank, because one person reads a news article and it gets copied and pasted a bazillion times. And then all of a sudden, brands are starting to get pressure from consumers to say, we don't want this and we don't want that. So it's been really interesting over the last few years to see this real shift in who's actually driving and dictating what goes into product development. So it used to be the brand came up with an idea, they launched a product. Now consumers are saying, well, we want this, we don't want that. So that's been a really interesting thing to watch, especially from an ingredient perspective. And that's sort of, I think, a lot of what's driven the shift towards vegan claims within beauty and personal care, because it just seems like that natural evolution. And for a lot of consumers, I think, right or wrong, this vegan claim has become this sort of catch-all, and it's sort of given them this idea that everything is safe. But to kind of go back to what you were saying regarding sort of legislation and regulation, there is none. And so that's the biggest, there is none. So the vegan claim is not regulated by the FDA. So, you've got these different like Leaping Bunny certification. I'm sure you've seen that one. That's probably the most common and the most recognizable. But there's a lot of these individual certifications that brands are getting, but there is no regulation, there is no legislation. So that creates a minefield, honestly, from my perspective, because how do you know who's doing the right thing and who you can trust?
It's really interesting, and I can imagine. So wait, that's in beauty. You're saying there's the regulation there isn't official. So then in fashion, is it even less so than that?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to kind of legislate these things in the fashion industry. And I think, as I was saying, it's definitely a case of there's definitely an interest in it there. People are becoming more and more aware. And I think within the fashion industry, I think the complicated thing is about your supply chain. So you're seeing a lot more demand, a lot more pressure from consumers for big brands and big retailers to be a lot more kind of transparent with their supply chains. And that kind of continues to kind of grow. And we're seeing more and more retailers moving along with that. But actually, in terms of, like you say, legislating vegan claims, I think that's very difficult to police. And as I was saying, there is this idea, similarly to what what you just said in beauty. It's there's this idea that if you're buying a vegan fabric, that it's sustainable, but that's not always the case. Some of these materials have been produced in a way that's really detrimental to the environment, and it actually is quite damaging to the habitats of the very animals that veganism is, in theory, trying to protect. You've got high water usage, you've got the plastics. These fabrics aren't biodegradable in the same way that natural fabrics are. So it's really, really a complicated issue.
It's really interesting.
And can I throw a food question back to you, Ed? Yeah. Just not necessarily a question, but just to play devil's advocate or kind of make a blanket statement and then see what you think. To me, there's this perception that vegan equals healthy, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case with food.
It's absolutely a big issue, actually, in the vegan, when we're looking at vegan food. So, there is when we ask consumers their reasoning, health is actually one of the main ones. So just to start at the beginning, we've actually got numbers. For example, in the UK, we've got 1 in 3 consumers saying that they are actively reducing their meat consumption. And when we've looked at other countries as well, similar sort of trends compared to like the 1 or 2% of people that are actually vegan. So that is obviously a level that it's healthier not to eat red meat. Now, the big challenge is if you're a vegan or if you're trying to eat more vegan food, are you going and buying a meat substitute? Or are you just having, lots of wonderful vegetables cooked in, lovely and wonderful ways. And I think that's where this issue has come. We're now getting a huge number of launches from these, from meat substitutes. And we've got using different ingredients, like we know soya already is there, but different proteins, pea proteins. We're seeing ingredients like seitan, like tempeh, like tofu, sometimes from mushrooms or fungi, and all different ingredients being used to try and replicate that meat experience so that you can drag those meat eaters into this category. But what normally happens is that those meat substitutes have to be pumped with various flavorings, salt, sugars, and all sorts of things to make them taste good, and also to make the texture work. And now the industry is caught on a little bit, and they're starting to be challenged. And also, we know that the fast food joints have joined up too, and they've joined the vegan trend with their own versions. And they're not going to pretend this is about health. They're going to pretend this is about other things. I think what is going to happen more are vegan brands or plant-based brands going to be a bit more clear that this is healthier because we only use vegetables and we don't use anything else. We don't add anything else. Or they're going to be honest and say this isn't about health and wellness. Might be about sustainability or welfare, or just let's celebrate vegetables and enjoy them. It's a big problem because I think at the moment the online community definitely believes that there is very much a healthy halo around the vegan claim. Is it not the same in beauty? Like there's better.
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, obviously we're talking about products that you're not actually ingesting. So that's kind of one thing, but
putting it on your face though.
Yes, you have it. Yes. Okay. So if it's lipstick, sure, you're ingesting that. But no, I mean, I certainly would not say that vegan or plant-based, or 100% natural when it comes to beauty products is necessarily the best way to go. Yeah. A variety of different reasons. First and foremost being, some of the things that Sam touched on, sustainability, biodiversity, how are these things grown? Where are they harvested? How are they processed? You've got all of these other questions that go into it as well. You're talking about an ingredient that potentially starts as a plant, but then it's processed chemically in some way to make it something else. So does that still fit in with this idea of vegan or plant-based? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So, a large portion of what we see happening, I really do think is an opportunity from the brand's perspective to just cater to the desires of a growing base of consumers that are demanding. Because again, I kind of made this point before, a lot of consumers see this vegan claim as a catch-all for a lot of other different things like cruelty-free and natural and plant-derived. A lot of consumers see vegan and they think, okay, that's kind of an umbrella that encompasses all of these other things. So that's definitely, something that I want. And so I think it's kind of bigger than just like with food. I think it's a little bit more straightforward. People that don't want to eat meat or animal byproducts, plain and simple, here's your food options. But with beauty, it's a little bit more sort of wishy-washy and convoluted, to be perfectly frank.
Well, interesting with food, because I think at the moment there's obviously a commercial opportunity here, and still, while we're talking about animal welfare and the environment and sustainability and all of these really big important trends that we're seeing in the media, when it comes down to it, and when you're a consumer, there are two attributes that are actually most important and will always be most important in food and drink, and that is taste and value. So if they want to buy a vegan product, it's got to be more affordable, and therefore these brands can't make it too expensive or people won't buy them, and they've got to taste nice. And consumers like the fact that they can now buy vegan food that really does taste nice, and they probably overlook some of those other questions around health and wellness and better for you, or even welfare. The most important thing is that things taste good, and it's just bringing us back down to earth a little bit. I think there's going to be more in the future. So getting into the future, or getting into some of the things that are happening, I'm going to move this conversation a little bit. So I'm going to start with you. Could you give us I just, for people listening, I really want them to hear, are there any great inspiring examples you've heard about this vegan plant-based trend in fashion that you just want to tell people about?
Yeah, I think there's a few things happening. I think what we've seen is, for quite a while, we've seen basically a lot of brands, I don't want to say jumping on the bandwagon, but, they've embraced it because I think actually, as you say, it's quite a commercial opportunity for them. So, you've got lots of different brands and retailers are stopping using fur, they're stopping using exotic skins. You've got a lot happening there. You've got lots of retailers expanding the range of vegan products that they offer. So even the likes of kind of H&M and M&S are constantly kind of expanding their range of vegan fashion products. But I think actually for me, the most interesting kind of examples of what we've seen are the ones where actually we're seeing a lot more about surrounding education and actually educating consumers about what they're buying into. And I think that's really interesting. So, we've recently seen a vegan fashion museum open in LA, which kind of, gives talks about the issues with animal-based products in the fashion industry. And then it kind of aims to highlight and showcase alternatives to animal skin. So you're seeing, lots of innovative fabrics coming through. So you're seeing leather made from everything from cork to apples and mangoes, right through to, like banana silk. And so what we're seeing is, more education around those. There's even recently been a vegan style book launched as well, which talks about kind of how consumers can be vegan, how they can buy into fashion. And I think that's really interesting because actually what our research does show is that, a lot of people are really overwhelmed when it comes to trying to buy ethical fashion, and actually consumers don't know which retailers and which brands are actually ethical. So I think, as I say, a lot of education around it is definitely going to help.
And Sarah, have you got I love that story. Before I even carry on, I think there's so many questions that are raised around that idea of, are there more? I wonder if there are more consumers who would be willing to buy a fashion item because maybe you haven't got that taste issue that you've got in food, than are actually willing to take up a full vegan diet. And I wonder what the percentage of, because I guess if the quality of the product is the same and it's not as easy to tell, then it's actually easier for consumers to move across. And therefore, is it more on the manufacturers that they just need to replace the items to make the world more sustainable? It's more on them than on the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I say, it's so complicated. And I think I think the reason why I kind of highlighted those 2 points is it's really about giving consumers the choice, and it's kind of informing them enough so that they feel like they can make those choices. And I think, like I say, I think the most interesting examples for me in everything in sustainability related at the minute is, how companies can really empower their own customers to make choices that they feel are informed. So a really interesting example is The Iconic in Australia has a filter to help people buy fashion depending on the causes that they care about most. That will include animal welfare, but it will also include things like workers' rights. It includes brands that give community support, things like that. And I think that's actually what's really interesting, is just how you kind of empower consumers to make those changes.
It's amazing what's going on, and in beauty, are we seeing again these sort of big stories coming out of this? Anything inspiring?
Yeah, I mean, and Sam hit it right on the head with regard to the education piece and helping the consumer kind of wade through all the noise to figure out what those right choices are for them. So I mean, I can give you I'll give you two examples. One, each on either end of the spectrum, doing it right and maybe not doing the best thing, not to shout anybody out, but I think it gives you some interesting things to think about as you sort of, as a brand, kind of are deciding if this is a way that you want to go. And what we have seen, there has been a lot of kind of bandwagonism. I don't think that's really a word. I just made it. Just in realizing that, this is the direction that people are moving in. So we better get on board, or we'll be left behind. There's kind of that thought process that's happening. So, I think
that's happening in every. I think even to the point where I'm not going to talk long. The thought that even the meat companies now are buying out or innovating in plant-based and meat substitutes, and which is what a move for them to do things like that. We've got there are Titan Foods in the US, a big meat manufacturer. They've had investment in like Memphis Foods, which is making like lab grown meat. And they've previously had investment in Beyond Meat as well. And so just that movement of investment, just so interesting. Sorry, carry on, but I thought.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's the great point, because we're seeing very similar activity with acquisitions within the beauty and personal care categories as well. So you've got all these great kind of indie brands and startups that have been vegan from the very beginning. And the multinationals are realizing if we want to capture that portion of the market, we can either do it ourselves or we can buy someone else that's already doing it, that's doing it right, that's got this great, fan base, et cetera, et cetera. But, on the topic of those big multi-brand companies, we've seen a lot of them in the last, 6 or 8 months move towards being vegan and announce that they're going vegan. And they've received a ton of backlash as a result because they are creating vegan product, but then they're also selling into the China market. And that's a whole other topic. But really quickly, for anyone that doesn't know, any beauty products that are sold into the China market can be subjected to animal testing. So they will actually pull product off the shelf in China and test it on animals. So whether the brand knows that that's happening or not, there is a possibility that that's happening. So consumers are now becoming educated about all of these different issues. And so this is something that comes up a lot with these bigger brands that are selling in the China market, but they're marketing themselves as being vegan. So that's a kind of a whole other sort of minefield that you need to be mindful of navigating and figuring out the right way to do that. But
I did not know that is just bonkers.
Yeah, it's crazy. And again, it's a much bigger topic, and I certainly, want to take us down that road here. But I think it's something that's really important to mention, and that's why we've seen a lot of that sort of negativity towards some of those brands coming out saying, "Hey, guess what? We're now vegan." And you see that you see their posts on like Instagram, for example, and the comments underneath are just, they're getting bashed because of it. So I think it's not as straightforward as it may seem on the surface. I guess that's my point there. But then on the complete flip side, you've got a brand, and one of the recent ones I saw was Milk Makeup, who went 100% vegan, and they've got this great page on their website that's all about educating the consumer. They talk about the difference between vegan and cruelty-free because they're not the same thing. They talk about the whole China market and China testing and everything. They talk about preservative systems because that's another area that comes up when we're talking vegan. So they've done a really nice job of giving the consumer all of that really great information and empowering them to feel as though they're making choices from an educated perspective.
And they call Milk Makeup.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, is that misleading?
Not vegan. Well, again,
that's the first thing I thought. But it sounds like an amazing story. But yeah,
yeah. Well, it's think oat milk or soy milk.
Okay, that makes me feel better. I've got a very small one, and only because I went last week to Sainsbury's. Have just launched. They've got a Love Your Veg range in the UK, which is just one of the vegan ranges that they've launched with different sausages, kebabs, ribs, all with meat substitutes, different meat substitutes, and they're all vegan. And what they've done is they launched a 3-day pop-up shop in Bethnal Green in London, and it was a vegan butcher, and you could go and buy your kebabs and your sausages that were sold in like a fresh way, not in packaging, and they would wrap it all up nicely in brown paper and all this a plant experience, and go home and put it on your barbecue. And it's just a really great way to show consumers that you can buy vegan and buy plant-based foods, have that experience, still get that fresh feeling when you're buying the product. And, they're still great tasting because they had all various different flavors and seasonings and spices ready-made. And I think it's just really inspiring way to show that this is not just a frozen sad patty that you've got in the freezer in the back of the supermarket in a special part of the supermarket. It's now front and center. It's just as fresh. It's screaming excitement about the vegetable and plant-based ingredients in new and innovative ways. That's what I love about this trend, because I think from the UK, the only thing we've ever known about health and wellness is that fruit and vegetables are good for you. I don't think I know much else other than health and wellness. In terms of everyone, that seems to be a consistent opinion among people that fruit and veg is good for you. And that's what some of the new launches are doing, is just shouting about the fruit and veg. I've got one last question, and we'll start with Sam, and then we'll probably close. But one of the questions is, what's the future going to look like for vegan fashion or plant-based fashion?
So, tricky question. I think it's really complex going forward, because, like I say, I think there is this idea that if you're buying into veganism, then you are living a more sustainable lifestyle. I think what we're going to see is a harsher spotlight placed on vegan fashion as a thing. So one really interesting example is we've seen a lot of, particularly the high-end fashion retailers, saying that they will stop making products out of exotic skins. And we've seen, even Selfridges has banned the sale of exotic skins. The counter argument to that is that because those brands need those fabrics, they spend an awful lot of money helping with conservation of certain animals, and then once that money is gone, that conservation will be a lot more difficult. So that's just one, like I said, one more interesting example of
what's
how
the exotic skin? Is it like, as in exotic animals' skins?
Yeah. So snake skins, things like that.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, and so obviously, if that conservation isn't there, it's is that detrimental to those species as a whole? If that money isn't being fueled into that. So I think, as I say, what we're going to see going forward is a lot more kind of consideration, and it's how you kind of, align the vegan fashion trend and the demand for vegan fashion, how you produce that and how you make that in a sustainable and environmentally friendly way. And I think that's what's going to come next, is that you're going to see a big spotlight being placed on it. And I think, arguably, a lot of brands have kind of jumped on the bandwagon, as I say, on the vegan fashion trend, because actually what we tend to see is that it isn't necessarily, I think what we tend to see is that it's an issue profits wise. So actually a lot of them have kind of stopped using all of these exotic animal skins, because actually they don't make huge profits on them. So I think it doesn't necessarily erode their profits if they stop selling them. But actually, like I say, it's how you make sure that you're making the right decision as in the long term as a brand or a retailer, making sure that, as I say, not only is a product vegan, but actually it's more environmentally friendly in the long run. And as I say, if these fabrics aren't biodegradable as well, what's going to happen to them in 20, 30, 40 years? Because they're still going to be around, and our consumers actually still going to be wearing, these vegan shoes that they've bought. Are they still going to be wearing them in 40 years' time? I'm going to argue probably not. So where are they? They're in a landfill.
Hopefully they'll be, if they can break down in a landfill rather than just being there forever. But we'll and in beauty, what do we think is going to come?
Yeah, there's a few different things. Number one is just, what's the landscape going to look like from the regulatory perspective? Because we're starting to see so many new claims popping up, free from, cruelty-free, vegan, environmentally friendly, all these different things kind of circulating now within the category. And there's no regulation around any of them. So we're seeing a lot more, conversation going on in Europe and in the US with the FDA and all these different organizations trying to figure out, is this something that we really need to start paying attention to, so that we can put some rules around it, so that not just anyone can slap a label on a product. So I anticipate that to change at some point in the not too distant future. And I think that also kind of feeds into the consumer desire for something that they can rely on, something that they can trust in. And, that trust, I think, is another big part of the conversation that we're seeing really start to change and evolve from a consumer perspective. And that's, really give me the information. What are those ingredients? Where do they come from? How do you make them? Where are they sourced? What part of the world do they come from? All of this kind of information now is what consumers are looking for. They want to know the story. It's not just about, oh, look at that color lipstick. That's beautiful. I'm going to buy that. They then want to know who made it, what was her name, where was she from, where did the ingredients come from? There's this whole kind of world that goes on behind the scenes that consumers want transparency on now. And we're starting to see that evolving and changing already with a lot of the brands. I expect to see that extend even deeper and further into the ingredients, especially as we're talking about, vegan and plant-based and things like that, because there is this kind of other kind of peripheral conversation that's going on. And that is plant-based or plant-derived or naturally derived the best thing for me as a human being from a safety perspective, but also for the planet? So, we're starting to see that shift, and biotechnology is something that we're really starting to see kind of come in and using, yeast and bacteria to sort of create a lot of these really interesting, very safe and pure ingredients that are actually allergen free, which you can't necessarily find in nature. So again, much bigger conversation that's going on, but there's some really interesting things coming in the future.
I think that topic of transparency in food and drink is probably, I've got two. I'm going to talk about the topic of transparency, just that if it's a vegan product, what's in it, and consume that. At the moment, this is in the short term, we're going to have to get to a point where consumers know if it's a dirty vegan or filthy vegan trend. Like, is it vegan comfort food, or actually is this trying to be healthier and better for me, and does vegan equal health? And I think that's going to come in the short term, that which brands are genuinely good for you and which one are about just giving you a great taste experience. I think that's the first thing. And the second thing is that we're growing population-wise in this planet. We just had Glastonbury, and we just saw that Attenborough got on stage and was so thankful that everyone was plastic-free at Glastonbury Music Festival. It just the impact that shows like Netflix, Our Planet, has had, and some of these TV programs teaching consumers about the future and what's going to come. At the moment, there's just too many of us, and there's going to be more of us on this planet to cope. I mean, this is sort of a bit of a downer, isn't it, guys? Sorry. But we are getting to a point where we need better balance in our diets, in what we eat, not just for our health, but for to keep the planet going. And what I'd like to start to see, and I think we will start to see from governments, from brands, from canteens, from restaurants, is this shift towards a more balanced dish. That the meat doesn't have to always be the main thing on the plate, that it can be an amazingly cooked aubergine or mushroom, those are my two favorite veggies. I think we're going to get to a point where, things like school dinners, you're going to see them getting rid of maybe more of the meat that's there and just replacing it with great veg, or great tasting vegetables. And I think that's what we've got to start to see, is this movement towards better balance for the planet as well as for people's health, because we've always talked about balance for health, but the planet can't cope otherwise. And it's that bigger question. And I think that's where this trend is going to eventually go. I don't know if you agree or disagree. I hope so. We seem to be agreeing on that main one.
I think so.
So, unless you've got anything further to add, I think we're going to finish it there. I feel like this topic's not going to go away. I feel like we're going to end up talking about this one every few months. It's going to come up. It's going to sneak into many of our podcasts and discussions as we've just launched, and it's really exciting. But I think we'll finish it there. So both of you, Sarah, Sam, thank you so much for joining me on our first vegan podcast. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. There's going to be more from you guys regularly, I'm sure, coming in as guests or as hosts or and so on. But otherwise, to our listener, guys, thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe. Please rate us, because we've joined the on all platforms, and make sure you give us 5-star review, preferably. And yeah, you can get them on any platform your podcasts are on. So please spread the word, please share, and we'll probably have another episode next week on Mintel's Little Conversation. If you want to know more about Mintel, what we are, what we do, just head over to our website. It's mintel.com. Follow us on social media. We're on everything. So we're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You probably find our names on those as well. Also, this is going to be a link to a blog post, so you can read all about it. And please join us next time for some more insights from our wonderful analysts. Guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.